this presentation, it's really starting the journey from understanding where and what your customer are interested in, all the way to what are the legal implications that are currently going on that as a company you need to be aware of and respect. We all know what generative AI is. It's a new branch of AI that focuses on the creation of new content. And one of the things that is great with generative AI is that it's not really limited to text like a lot of the previous machine learning, but there a single model like the GPT-4o can now generate text, images, audio, and even videos with Sora. The other big thing like to keep in mind in the space is really that studies made by a number of companies have like to suggest that most of the use cases are going like to be in four main area of application. So it's things like customer operation. How do you help in support centers and call centers? Things around marketing. How do you create your marketing plan with generative AI and the content that is necessary? Software engineering. There is a lot of repetitive steps and boring steps that occur in software engineering, and there is a lot of opportunities there. The main one, as a user of the technology on a daily basis when I code, is around unit test. I don't know if we have a lot of coders on the call today, but the most uninteresting part of developing a solution is making sure that you have units that works. By leveraging generative AI, you can generate these, or at least having a recommendation in terms of what you need to implement. And then finally, more generically, research and development. We see already in pharmaceutical domain a lot of work that has been done around drug discovery and making suggestion in terms of looking at proteins and drugs, finding similarities between the different drugs and problems, and determine whether or not they would be applicable to other diseases. So now let's start our journey. In my practice, I always start by the same thing, which is really to understand the customer. And there is a great framework that exists. I was developing it in the 90s. It's called like the jobs to be done framework. And really what it looks at understanding what the pain points that you're trying to solve for your customer. So I've been in technology for 20 plus years, and being in technology, we sometimes think about, yeah, this is a great idea, or a great use of the technology for a new problem or an existing problem. But the fact that we think that there is a potential problem doesn't really mean that there is an actual paying customer at the end of it. So really, by starting by the uncovering of the customer pain points, we're able like to look at, well, what are the problem? What are they trying to achieve? And where are the pain point or the bottleneck in their current workflow and processes? And then be able like to change that to provide them with new products. Now, uncovering the pain points is great. But one thing that I would always say is that, for a startup, it's always important like to fail quickly and to understand whether or not you're going on the right path. To do that, there is this framework called diffusion of innovation theory. And really what it says is that whenever you're creating a novel solution, you're going like to find yourself with two sets of customers. You have the innovators and the early adopters, and these are the people that you want to target. These are the ones that are going like to be willing to leverage the technology in new ways. And then you have the chasm, and then you have the early majority up to the laggards. And these, for a startup and for validating new ideas, are not very useful because they're not innovative. They're not very open to new paradigm as part of it. These would be more, legacy company that are trying like to leverage technology, but in their use of technology, it may be taking like them 10 years to truly adapt the technology. So now we have the problem. We have identified what are early customers that would be interested in our product. The next step, it's really leveraging this lean startup design thinking methodology of trying like to look and create iteratively new capabilities. So you may have heard of the term of minimum viable product, or MVP, and essentially that's what you want to put in front of customers. And that's where you're going like to get the most of the feedback from the customer. Just to give you like an example from my personal and work life, when I first joined my previous company, whenever I was trying like to share innovative ideas to my business partners, I would write a presentation. And it was great because I could get uptake from them very quickly. They would be interested, they would be engaged. But the problem is once the meeting was done, they would leave. They had other things to be doing, and they would totally forget about it. In the last 2 years, I changed my approach completely, and I started creating POCs. So small capabilities that would demonstrate to the user in a hands-on way what the problem we were trying to address and how they would be able like to see that. And what we were getting was much faster feedback from them because they were now having something that they could use and they could touch, but also they didn't have any time constraint in terms of being able to touch it. Let's say they wanted like to look at it after work or at another time when they had time. Well, they didn't have to go and find where the presentation was. They had like the solution that was available for them to use. And then I would say at the start of the cycle, and the last point that is really important when it comes to startups and be successful is really leveraging diverse perspectives. And that goes into two ways. One way, it's looking at multidisciplinary teams. So in this image, you see like you not only have data scientists who are engineers, but you have prompt engineers, you have the project managers, you have the customer experience researchers, and all of them together are going to provide a 160 view of the problem and of the user. Now, diversity will also provide you with some insights, and I will go through it a bit later on, but it will also help you making sure that you think about potentially new way to innovate, but also that you think from the start about potential risk of bias. If your team is all of the same background, then you will have like just that mentality or that approach in your head. Now, if you have people coming from various backgrounds, you will have a opportunity to challenge one another and be able like to integrate that feedback very early on, as opposed to waiting to speak to customers. So now you have identified the customer problem. You've identified your early customers. You have built your team, and you're starting a new process of generating that solution to get early feedback. The next step is really the right fit for the right job. And what I mean by this is that if we look at technology, it is not necessarily that the latest and the brightest model, if we speak about generative AI, is going to perform the best. There are other considerations that you need to take into account, like performance, cost, and things like that. But another thing is the speed at which the space is changing. This was a picture from April 2024, and it's already outdated. It doesn't mention things like Gemini Pro. It doesn't mention GPT-4, or it doesn't include MAI from Microsoft. It's really, or Llama 3. No, Llama 3 is mentioned, but Phi 3 is not mentioned. So it's a space in which things are evolving very fast. And a lot of these large models will have different usage. And generally that will be due to the training set and the training data that they're using. Um, now, um, to assess these models, there are a number of existing frameworks or benchmarks. Just to name some of them, there is the multitask, multi-domain language understanding, or MMLU, that is looking at natural knowledge across different subjects, including social science and STEM. Um, you have the AI2 or the Allen Institute Reasoning Challenge or ARC that is looking at a question and answer type of problems. And then you have the Human Eval benchmark that measure the program's programming aspects. These are relatively good, and they can provide you like with an idea of what you should be using. The other one that I put here, this is TrustBit, and what they're trying like to do is they're trying like to show different, and they are keeping a benchmark that they update like on a monthly basis of the performance of the different LLM against these these use cases. So CRM is customer relationship management, code is programming, document is handling large codes, and then you have marketing and reasons, and to try to bring them together. You have other places where you can go and look at what is a cost or what is this throughput. So if you are dealing with use cases where you need to handle a lot of tokens, well, you probably want like to use a model that can handle that number of tokens. Otherwise, you need to create a full strategy around it of chunking the content that you're passing before you can generate the information that you're interested in. Now, benchmark is great. They will enable you to look at different models, and they are going like to be able like to suggest which one may be like the best for the use case that you have. So it can be used as a pre-selection or maybe up to 3 or 4 different large language models. But you have to be very careful. The fact that something is a leader in terms of one of the benchmark does not necessarily mean that it's going like to be fitting for your use case. There are some semi-ethical question in terms of benchmarking that a lot of the companies that are creating large language model, and OpenAI is one of them. Databricks is another one. They don't publish.
Devices aren't available.
Sorry.
You might want to try setting them up again.
They don't publish the training data that they're training on. Though it could be that as part of their training data to be higher on the board, that they've actually included data from the different benchmark. If you have a problem that is that you're looking at particular capabilities, not all of the benchmark cover that. The rapid model evolution, if we look with Sora more recently and what is going on with video generation, there is not really a benchmark that is used and available. Take another example, Neo4j, which is an application, which is a graph database, and is using its own language. There is not really a benchmark to assess whether the query generated in that language are going like to be part of the benchmark, or there is no benchmark to evaluate them. So if you're doing text to cipher, which is a language, or SQL, well, you may need like to create your own benchmark, or you will need to create your own benchmark to be able like to assess the fitness of these models. And finally, there is a narrow focus of the benchmark. So if you're trying like to address a very complex customer problem, they may not be like training data that relates to that as part of like the different models. So my advice is that when you have pre-selected these 3 LLMs, that you start experimenting with your application, with your ID to determine what is the values that you have. How well does it fit your problem? And generally that requires like to have some level of golden set to be able to do that assessment. And I will just give a practical example Recently, I've been writing a number of different blogs, and this presentation is actually inspired from the series that I'm writing around putting together your strategy around generative AI. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to limit the size of the blog based on different parameters, either by the number of words or by length in terms of reading time. And I was using Google Gemini 1.5 to do this, but everything I was trying to do, I was trying to change the prompt. I was putting the prompt through or through an LLM to make it faster and better, but I could never get more than X number of tokens or X number of words. And what it actually transpired when I did a bit more research is that Gemini doesn't understand, or most large language model don't understand counting. So they're not able to count, and they were not trained to count the number of words and things like that. So it's normal that they were never following my instructions, regardless of the instruction. I think this is a very practical example of how you may have selected the best LLM for your use case, but then when you are applying it, you see that there are limitations and you need to address these to make your product more efficient. So now you've selected your LLM. So we're in the next phase of our process. One of the things, and I alluded to this earlier, is that the world of generative AI is changing so rapidly. Last week, Open GPT-4o was announced. The next day, Google announced its own thing. 5.3 came up, Llama 3. And it means that it's really difficult to keep track to what is actually providing. So it is extremely important to monitor the output from your solution. So you may have used GPT-4, and then you're trying to get to GPT-4o, and you don't get the same result that you expect. That could cause a problem. Note that some LLM providers have started to deprecate older versions of their LLM. So for example, GPT-2 is no longer available, DALL-E 2 is no longer available. So there is an expectation that over time, and as these new models are released, that you need to select a newer one. And you need to, also an important part is that you need to ensure regulatory compliance. And this is another aspect, and I will go to this aspect a bit more in detail in a minute. But that's an area where things are also rapidly evolving. In the US, with the upcoming general election, I think that we are going to see a plethora of new regulation and legislation that are going to come at the state and federal level, but not always necessarily with a good intention. But I will go with that in a minute. So all of that was really to say that you need continuous and rigorous monitoring of the performance of your system as you go through iterations. You may have there are different type of drift that can occur when leveraging machine learning more generically, but also specifically associated with generative AI. So the distribution shift. Because the training set are generally not transparent or available for people to look at, what can happen is that they make changes to the data and it's no longer doing what it was intended to be. Data quality issues. Although companies are putting guardrails to ensure that their training set doesn't include copyright, well, you still need to make sure that as new versions are available, that you're respecting some of these things. And finally, you have a domain shift. There may be that, let's say, OpenAI decide that the way that they're going to make money is no longer with general intelligence, or artificial general intelligence, or AGI, but being very specific to a domain like healthcare. Well, if you were leveraging GPT for a generic use case, then it's no longer going like to fit your problem space. So let's now get into what is probably like the most important part of your journey. And it relates to responsible AI and focusing on creating solutions that are ethical, transparent, and developed in an accountable manner while mitigating potential risk and negative impact. And you need to do this from the start. You cannot implement responsible AI as an afterthought to your problem. You need like to understand the consequences of using a particular model. And by embedding best practice around responsible AI from the start, you can mitigate your risk and ensure that you are following increasingly regulated and socially conscious AI landscape. But what is responsible AI? There is many different definitions and many different aspects of it. I think like at the core of all of the principles that I have seen being generated, Microsoft has got a very extensive, well-documented course on their responsible AI, where you can go through everything. But the main four aspects that I consider is around fairness, that you need to treat all of your customers fairly, and that you need like to do it without discrimination and unfair bias, which goes back to the diversity that I mentioned earlier. It needs to be transparent and explainable. You need like to be able like to say to your customer why the AI led to a particular decision for the particular use case. It has to be accountable and reliable. So I mentioned monitoring in terms of a drift, but if there is a bad interaction, let's say that your LLM is starting like providing content that is not safe for work, and you are targeting professionals, but you want to track that. You want to have the audit trail so that you can go back later on, investigate the problem, and you don't want that to be done through your customers. You want to be very proactive in terms of handling that type of issues, because at the end of the day, this is what is impacting the trust of your customer and your product. And then another aspect that you want to safeguard, especially if you are working with professionals that are providing you with intellectual property content, is that none of the content that you are processing can be intercepted or used. And the same if you are in highly regulated industries like healthcare with HIPAA and information, data information, and personal information, it's even more important. I mentioned that responsible AI and that there were really various regulations that are going on. Just last week, the European Parliament finally agreed on the EU AI Act that covers and defines a framework to assess the risk of your application. One of the things that they are banning, social scoring. So if you're doing anything that can lead to the social aspect of one of your worker or your customer, then that's an issue. In Tennessee, with the Elvis Act, the legislature has created a law that says that you cannot leverage the voice and picture of people as part of your AI. I think if you were looking at anything related to AI in the past weeks, you may have heard of the issues between Scarlett Johansson and OpenAI, where it seems that they may have hired an actress that sounded like her, but it's so close that nobody really knows. In any case, cloning, leveraging people's voice without their consent is an issue. Now, one thing that I would say about that law, which is if you are operating in Tennessee and you're wanting to do these type of things, is that the language is very unclear, and there is an aspect of the legislation that could be interpreted that any company that, even if they didn't intend, that offer some capabilities that will generate images or sound or voices, could be asked like to cease and desist if someone with a resemblance to that was complaining, even if it was a user creating the information and not the company itself. So that will have an impact as well on the different laws and use cases that you may have. Finally, there are many laws that are currently in discussion. You have Stop Spying the Boss Act, which is, again, go back somewhat to social scoring, where you cannot use any information to score the productivity of your employees. Use it in a positive way or a negative way, it doesn't really matter. And then finally, there is a new proposal at the federal level that is looking at what are the information that would need to be provided by any LLM generator when dealing with copyrighted materials. And this is changing very rapidly. Beyond the regulatory, and I touched on this a bit when I mentioned Microsoft and their responsible AI principle, there are many things that have been put forward already for voluntary monitoring and implementation of responsibility paradigms. The main two are the NIST AI risk management framework and the OECD AI principles. Some of you may also have spoken like to Zhao Chen, who is the CEO of AI 2030, which is a think tank in Chicago that is looking at creating a framework around responsible AI that benefit humanity while minimizing potentially negative impact. So now we found our problem, we built our team, we monitor our process, and we implemented responsible AI throughout our solution. So my key takeaways from here: understand your specific problem that your AI solution is addressing. So understand your customer. Evaluate the different LLMs to determine not only the suitability in a generic way, but also to your specific problem. Because you may have something that will not address the problem that you're trying to solve. Implement continuous monitoring to ensure your solution remains effective and relevant. And auditing to ensure that if something goes wrong, that you're notified so that you can work with your customer to maintain trust. And as I just covered, onboard responsible AI principle from the start to build that trust and sustainable relationship with your customer. This one is the most important. If you are creating a solution that is not ethical, you're going to very quickly find yourself in problem. And it's right now, there is somewhat that gray area that legislation is not available. Therefore, they could see that there is no law that contradicts or stops you from doing it. But by having the right responsible AI principles from the start, you can determine whether or not it will be for the good of society or just a product. And then here is my call to action. At the end of the day, you as leaders of your startups are going to be the face of the startup. So be cognizant that responsible AI is not an option. If you have not created a web page that clearly define what your AI principles and what the guardrails you're putting in for responsible AI solution, do that the first thing you wake up tomorrow morning. I know you may be late for some people, depending on which time zone you are in. But please, This is really important. You need to be able like to communicate this to your customer so that you can build that trust, even though they may not have used your tool. Stay informed. This space is changing so fast. You know, I blink and I've missed 500 things that have occurred. As I mentioned, as startups, you have an opportunity to lead by example, to drive positions change. One of the main advantage you have as a startup compared to a well-established company is that you can change fast. You can actually implement things in a fast way. I worked for a top 500 company here in the US, and getting the right velocity to change and adapt new technology was always a problem. You don't have that. You don't have existing product. You are able like to build your solution from the ground up with the technologies that is meaningful to your problem. Focus on the world that you're shaping. And then as a community through 1871 and others, I really like ask you like to engage. Try like to see if things like AI 2030 have options for you like to be involved in driving how responsible AI is going to be defined, how you're able like to help with that. This is far from exhaustive. There are resources right, left, and center that you can use. These are some of the ones that I use. Some of the course that I did online to get certification. Some of the newsletters that I subscribe to, some of the podcasts, and some of the communities that I am actively part of. In these communities that I listed there is always a Chicago chapter, but they tend like to be not dedicated to Chicago. So if you are based in Austin, or if you're based like in the Silicon Valley, all of these have actually local chapters that you can join.